Hello everyone, I'm Regina Bale, Environmental Education Coordinator at Florida Gulf Coast University's The Water School. I work for the Center for Environment and Society, and I'm really glad that you're watching our videos today about Survey123, and I hope this helps you collect some data outdoors with your students. In this series, we will learn how to make a Survey123 in ArcGIS Online. This survey will work as a data collection tool for you and your students as they work on specific science lessons. So if you don't have a specific science lesson with you or on your mind right now, you might want to find one because you can follow along with this video and build one yourself. This video consists of the different question types or data input types for your survey. So on the right side of your screen, when you're looking at a new survey in the design section, there is a plus add tab. Under the plus add tab, there are several different data input or question types. So we're going to look at this first group of question types that focuses on text, number, date, and time. So when you're in a Survey123, you have a lot of options for ways that students can input their data, also known as the question types. So we're going to go through each one. So first we have the single line text. This allows the user to type letters, numbers, and symbols. This would be useful for when there are many unique responses being collected, like the user's name or a shorter observation. Multi-line text works similarly to the single line text input, but gives more space for the user. This is good for typing descriptive notes and observations. The number input type only allows numbers to be input. This is useful for any type of measurement or count being collected. Date and time can be done as one option or as two separate input types. Depending on the data that you are collecting, you may only need the date without the time, or maybe all that you care about is having that timestamp. It's up to you to think about what is the data that you need to collect. This is why having that lesson in mind helps out a lot in selecting the different data input or question types. So email requires the user to put in letters, numbers, and symbols. This question type will not allow the user to submit a response that does not have the requirements of an email address, such as the @ symbol. Lastly, in this question set is the website input question type. It requires that the user put in letters, numbers, and symbols. This question type will not allow the user to submit a response without the requirements of a URL, such as .com being in the writing. So at least one thing that helps avoid user error is if you have the right question type or input type, you'll avoid issues. If you want to know a website, but you put in a question type of single line text, the user or your student could type in any letters or symbols, and it may not be a website. It will accept that response. But if you use the website input type, it won't accept the response unless it has the conventions of a website. So now is the choice section. These are all of the different input types where you're going to be authoring the options for them to select. And there's a lot of different ways they can select options. So based off of the data you need to collect for your lesson, you'll want to pick the right choice type. So the first basic data input type in the choice section is single select. You design the options and the user is only able to select one of the options. You can allow other as an option as well, where the user can type a different response than the ones that are listed. Single select items will always be dots, while multiple select will be boxes. This input type would be useful with data that is a predefined and narrow focus. For example, select the group that you're working in, your class period, select what direction that you are facing. There's only so many options for that, so you can put that in as a single select, and there's only one correct option for you because you're not going to be in multiple class periods or working in multiple groups. So that is single select. The next choice type is multiple select, which once again you'll design the options and the user will be able to select options, but this time they can select multiples. You can allow other as an option for this as well, and the student or the user can type in something different than what is listed. This input type would be useful when more than one thing is true at the same time. So for example, if you're observing an outdoor space, the user might observe plants and animals, or for a more advanced group, they might observe a mammal, bird, reptile, grasses, a deciduous tree. So having all of these different options available that they can select multiple ones if they saw multiple things. Next is the single select grid. The single select grid is a grid of single selects where all the choice options are the same for all of the items in the grid. This input type is useful to avoid making several single select inputs again and again that happen to have the same choice options. For example, if we're going outside and looking at the ground cover types and the amount of coverage that you'd find on the ground. The list of ground cover types would be on a each of the horizontal lines on the grid, while the choices of the amount of ground cover could be less than 25%, 25 to 50%, 51 to 75%, and more than 75%. Those would go as the columns of the chart, so that for each ground cover type, you would be able to select how much of the ground is covered by that type. In that scenario, you'd also want a 0% for things that don't appear in that area, but might appear in other areas. So someone could say it's 25% concrete, but then it's between 51 and 75% grasses. If you also have the option of gravel and there's no gravel, you'd want to be able to click on 0% for gravel. The next option is the drop down. The drop down is very similar to the single select in that you can only select one option and that you can also allow the other option as well. The main difference is that a drop down will not show all of the choices until it is clicked on, which saves space on your survey. So some of this will depend on maybe how many answer choices there are when it comes to your single select versus your drop down, or how crowded or difficult it is to look at this survey on different devices. So you can switch between question and input types depending on how user-friendly it is to use this survey. The Likert scale is a horizontal scale with customizable options. So this scale is useful for individual input types or questions, and it's very often used as like a survey where you put disagree, neutral, and agree. There's a lot of different ways you could use this, but what's nice is if you have about 3 to 5 options in that horizontal scale, you can kind of compare and look at them that way. So the last two left are rating and ranking. So rating is a type that starts from the left to right, where there is an icon that will fill in for a level selected by the user. So the different types of icons could be in the form of stars, hearts, and a thumbs up. So there could be about 5 of them, and then the user would rank, is this a 1 out of 5 stars, a 4 out of 5 stars, by just clicking on stars from left to right. When you hover over the symbols, they fill in with color, and then the number related to the icons that you've filled in appears to the right of the icon list. And this is changeable. Once you click on it once, you can move it back and forth before you submit to get the right amount for your rating. So ranking is different than rating. Rating is kind of like an out of 5, out of 4, depending on how you set it up. Ranking style input has a preset tile list that you customize. The user can then take the tiles and drag them into a rank order from the top spot as 1, counting all the way down to the total amount that you have. So the numbers will automatically change as the tiles are moved around. So you determine what the different options are, and then the student would rank them accordingly. So you could use this input type for, showing layers or levels of importance. One of the things I thought of was how you would organize geological layers, but you could use it for multiple things, but it does show kind of a set. So it could be like steps, a countdown, levels of importance. So those are the choice basic design types for inputs. Let me rephrase that. Those are the basic data input types for the design section when it comes to choice. So there are two very useful design input types that I just love, and why Survey123 is so important to use is the location data. So there are two options for location data input. The user can use a map and place the location, or utilize the location on their device to place the location on the map. The second option is to have the user input the address of the location. If the data you're collecting is very specific to areas within a property, the map would be your best choice. But if the data that is collected is for like the overall property or area, then the address can work. So for example, most of the surveys that I have developed are about specific spots within a schoolyard. How is the north side of the schoolyard different than the south or east side, or even that of retention ponds, if I'm on this side of the pond versus that side of the pond. So I use the map as my location. One thing important to work out with students is understanding how to set up their device so that location services are actually on. And the second is how to carefully read that map and correct where that dot is. So some devices very quickly hit the right spot of exactly where you're standing. Others, you might need to move it a little bit. So the map one is the more precise option than the address option, but the map one will take some understanding and fine tuning. So media and files is the next basic data input type. This could be used for multiple purposes. There are 4 media and file input options. So the image option allows for the user to take a photo or add photos that are already saved to their device. This is a useful tool for the user to take photographs of what they are observing with the rest of the data collected. I use this image option a lot because if there's a oddity to the data, something just doesn't seem right, seeing the photos of where everything was taken and comparing it to the map, you could also kind of see how they collected the data if you ask them to photograph what they were doing. It'll help you understand if there's any like abnormalities in the data. And it's a great discussion with your students about what happened. For the file upload, it allows the user to upload files that are saved to their device. This could be useful if there's some type of form that all the users need to submit or fill out that is tracked digitally, and it will go with that data point they're collecting. Audio allows the user to record or upload an audio recording, which can be very useful for the user who may prefer to speak rather than type. Or if they're observing an area for sounds, they could actually record some of the sounds instead of describing and writing what they heard. So a lot of great options. The last one is the signature option. I haven't had need for using this in the classroom very often, but it is available so that someone could sign that they've completed the survey. So here's some things to think about when it comes to best practices for selecting the question types or the data input types. You want to think about what your current lesson plan is or lab. You need to have that in mind. Otherwise, you're just going to be kind of guessing at what your survey needs, what data you're going to collect. Second thing is to know what data is being collected. If you know the lesson and you know there's a specific type of data that's being collected, that will help you decide what kind of question types you're going to need. What format will the data be in? So are these written observations? Are these images? Are these numbers? That's going to help you figure out what you need to do when it comes to question types. And then once you have that information, you can think about, here are all the basic input types that we have available on Survey123. What would be the best way to collect this data? So as a quick example at the end of this video, I just thought about an 8th grade pH lesson. So going outside, testing water that we find outside. What is the pH value? So what are we collecting? pH value. What format is it collected in? It's collected in numbers 0 through 14. So which question type should I select? Number. Now, I probably won't just collect pH value. This is just the first example, but I could also add, well, I want to know where outside I collect this pH value. So it'd still be my 8th grade pH lesson, but then I would be collecting location data. And I would want to know exactly where this happened at, so I would want to use the map option. So that way they could point out on this side of the lake or on this side of the property or the puddle that formed right here. So use this to kind of help you plan out what would work best. So as you're designing these questions, you get a few options. So when you select a question type, it asks you for a label, a hint, and validation. So we're going to play with this more in other videos. This is just the overview of how it works. So once you have a question type or a data input type, the label is what the user is going to see, and it's what you're going to be able to identify on your map and dashboards. The label becomes the field's name used in other applications, so leaving it as untitled question 1 is not a good idea, because when you try to use it later, it will be very confusing to remember what is being collected in untitled question 1. So clear labeling that does not repeat is very important. If you just put pH, it might get confusing. So pH of water, pH of juice, pH of the lake, pH of the water fountain. Depending on how your lab is set up or your activity, be specific. And then the labels that are hard to understand will make your future maps, dashboards, other surveys very difficult to work with. So be very clear about that. When it comes to the hint is totally optional, but the hint will be visible to the users if you use it, and it can be very supportive. So think about if the students are not familiar with pH, or they may not have remembered the term. Someone was absent the day you started talking about the pre-lab and now you're on the lab. Having the hint there will be useful to help them out so that they know you should be taking out the pH probe. You're going to get a number between, 1 and 14. Only input that number. Very simple. Without the hint, you're hoping that they remember all the directions or the directions that are posted. So the hint is useful for a lot of these different questions, especially when you're doing data collection. So validation is a separate part of this that most people kind of skip over, but this is how you can customize things, which I want you to spend some time on thinking about how to customize each question. So validation is the section of the edit tab. You usually scroll down to see this, past the label and the hint. Validation allows you to add conditions to the data input type. So one of the first ones is this is a required question. Being able to click on that means that someone cannot submit unless they answered it. Very useful tool so you don't get half completed things. Then again, if this question isn't that important and you could collect the other data and skip this one, you might not want to have it as a required question. So it comes back to planning out how you set up your lesson or lab. You're also having some options here for, like, this example validation is for the number question. There are different types of validations for other questions. Like for the photo one, you can set a minimum, maximum photos. For this validation for the number question input type, you can allow integers only integers for responses. So when you click on must be an integer, you can't actually put in a decimal point, but if you leave it unchecked, you can put in a decimal point. So for example, the pH lab. If you're using the pH test strips and you just want whole numbers, then yeah, click must be an integer. The only thing they can give you is a whole number. But if you are using like a sensitive tool, like a pH probe, you'll usually get some form of decimal point. Then you'd have it as, not unchecked, so that you can have a decimal point in the responses. Students will get an error if it says must be an integer and they put in a decimal point. It won't let them submit. Setting a minimum and maximum value, also very useful. So in this example, pH, there is a minimum and maximum. While in other examples, there's not much point in having a minimum and maximum because it could be almost any number. So you just want to use that to help avoid students putting in data that is inaccurate. For example, temperature. If you're using Fahrenheit or Celsius, there are definitely going to be caps of what is reasonable for temperature outside. So to avoid students accidentally putting in a temperature of 80 degrees Celsius when they meant Fahrenheit, other than just labeling it Celsius and Fahrenheit, you might want to set a minimum and maximum of what would be, logical in that scenario. So those are all of the different question types. I know this was a long video, but it was hopefully useful for you to think about as you're designing and you're collecting data, what input type, what type of question you should select for what lab you're doing and all of the different data points. The more organized and well thought out and designed your survey is, the easier making your maps, your dashboards, your story maps, and everything in between becomes, because your data collection tool is easy to use. So I hope you learned a lot about the different question types or data input types in Survey123 and ArcGIS Online. And hopefully the survey that you're building right now will be a great data collection tool for you and your students as they work on specific science lessons. Thanks for watching.